Hello and welcome to this video and welcome to this channel. My name is Anja and I have a degree in fashion and textile design, and today we're gonna go through a beginner's guide on how to start sewing. I am really excited to share all of my knowledge, and I'm really happy to tell you that by the end of this video you will be able to start sewing, have everything ready, because we're gonna cover everything from how to set up your sewing machine, how to make your first stitches, what do you need, absolutely everything. So don't worry, you're in the right place, and let's just dive in. Oh, and one last thing, I also prepared a little freebie that is gonna help you with your sewing journey. Okay, now let's get into it. Now I understand that starting something new can be very scary, it can be very overwhelming, but don't worry, I got your back, you're in the right place, and we're gonna go through everything together. To get you all ready and set up, I will just give you a quick timeline of what we're gonna learn in this video, what we're gonna talk about. And first is going to be the basic equipment and tools that you will need. Then we're gonna talk about a sewing machine, and I'm gonna introduce all the parts of the sewing machine. How do you set it up? How do you start with your first few stitches? Then I prepared a little freebie that is gonna help you start with sewing and is gonna guide you. And then I'm gonna give you a very fast recap of all the fabrics, and at the end we're gonna try to make your first little product so that you can see how easy sewing actually is. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so we're gonna start with some essential tools that you will need to start sewing. Of course, the biggest one, or the number one, is the sewing machine. I have my sewing machine right here. It's a very standard sewing machine, nothing special. It's not even mine, it's borrowed from my mom. But right now you just need a very basic sewing machine. We will get back to it. I will introduce it to you, so don't worry. And the rest of the things is in this box. This is my sewing box where I keep all the tools. So let's take a look of few essentials that you will need, okay? So the first ones would be the needles. Here I have my needles for sewing. This is for hand stitching, and they are also for the machine. Of course, those are two different types of needles, but you will need both especially if you're using a sewing machine. These ones come in different sizes, and the way that you decide on which size to use is depending on the material. If you have a thicker material, like jeans for example, you're using a thicker needle, and if you have something that is a bit more delicate, a bit more thin, then you're using a thinner needle, and maybe a thinner material would be like a chiffon, right? So needles are the first thing that you will need when you want to start sewing. The second thing that you will need is a thread. Here I have the white thread, the white normal thread, and the black thread. These are the two basic ones that I would suggest you to get at the start. It's the ones that you will probably use the most, but of course the more you're sewing, the more different colors of threads you're gonna get. And also, usually I recommend people to match their threads to the color of the material that you're using. Of course, it doesn't have to be if that is like a design choice that you're making, but I would usually recommend that if you have a yellow fabric, you use a yellow thread, usually the one that is matching. The next thing, or the third thing, would be a measuring tape. Here I have quite a few of them. This one is actually my favorite. I don't know why. It's just, it has colors on one side for each 10 centimeters, which makes it really easy to just kind of navigate, and the other side is just normal yellow. They're in centimeters. It really depends where you're from. I know that in the US they're using inches and they're a bit more familiar with that, and I just use it every time that I'm sewing, so very, very important. The next thing would be the scissors, and these are not normal scissors, these are the scissors for the fabric, and I would recommend you to really use them just for fabric cutting, because otherwise this blade is gonna get damaged and then it's not gonna be cutting as sharp as maybe you would want to. So I would recommend you keep the scissors just for the fabric and have another pair that is for the paper. Of course, additionally to these big ones, you can also get these smaller ones that can be just for the little thread when you stop sewing. Another thing that is really, really essential are the pins. Here's my box of pins. I have two different types of pins in here. I have the ones that are without a cap, just like that. And I have ones that have a little colorful ball at the top, like this ones right here. Now, I know that a lot of people are using these plastic clippers. I personally don't use them because we were forbidden in school to use those ones, because you cannot achieve the type of precision that you can with these types of pins. But of course, if you are more used to those, then you can use them. Now, the tool that nobody wants to use, but it's absolutely essential, is the seam ripper. I actually have like 3 of them here, and it's just this little thingy that will help us to remove the seam every time we make a mistake. There's nothing wrong, we are learning, right? But this is a very helpful tool that we're gonna use a lot. Now, of course, we can have all the tools and we can have the machine, but if we don't have the fabric, then we don't have anything to sew together, right? So here I have my box of fabrics. And that would be the last thing that you will need for your sewing project. I have here different fabrics. They come in different colors, different patterns, different structures, for whatever I need. Now, for a beginner like yourself, I would just recommend a normal 100% cotton fabric that is not stretchy, and I think you're good to go. So now that we collected all of our tools, we can move to the next step, that is the sewing machine. Okay, so this is the machine that we will be working with in this video, and here's the foot pedal that comes with the machine. First, at the top, we have a bobbin winder, and as the name says, this is where we wind the bobbin. And then next to it, we have a spool pin. This is where we put the upper thread. Then we have the thread guide on this side. Here is a needle, the press foot, and the fed dogs. Then in the back, we have a press foot lever. This moves the press foot up and down. And then back in the front, we have a stitch selector, and then on this machine specifically, we have all the stitches drawn. And this little paddle is a reverse stitch lever. This one, as we said before, is the foot pedal. This little wheel on the side is the balance wheel, and it moves the needle. You can see it right here. And right there at the top, on that little wheel, I have a stitch tension control. Let's move to the bottom part of the machine. We open this little part here that is called a bobbin compartment. In the bobbin compartment, we have a bobbin, which is this little plastic cylinder, and we have the bobbin case, which is that metal thingy that holds the bobbin. And both together, we insert into that bobbin compartment. Usually, it needs a little click. And that is kinda it with the basic parts of a sewing machine. And now we're gonna set up the sewing machine. First, we're gonna take the foot pedal and we're gonna plug it in and put the foot pedal on the floor. Then we're gonna take the other part that has an outlet and we're gonna put that into electricity so that, of course, our machine works. Okay, so what we're gonna do first is we're gonna select a string and we're gonna open this bobbin department. We're gonna take out the bobbin case with the bobbin, separate them, and put the bobbin on a bobbin winder. And then we're gonna put the string on the spool pin and we're gonna wind the thread in a way that we're gonna fill up this bobbin. I have on the side a little switch that signals the machine that it's time for winding the bobbin and not for sewing, so I do that. And then I press the foot pedal very gently, and then the bobbin winder starts rotating and it's being wound up with a thread. We do that until the thread is completely covering the bobbin. Then we cut the thread and we take the bobbin away. There you go. We put the bobbin into the case and we put the string through this little canal that it has. There you go. And now we're gonna put the bobbin with the bobbin case into the bobbin compartment and we're gonna press it until it clicks. Now it's time for the upper string. So each machine has a different winder road, but this one goes all the way to the left, then down, back up through the thread take up, and then back down into the needle. Once the needle is through the thread, I rotate the balance wheel so that the needle goes into the bobbin department and it collects the thread from the bobbin and it brings it up to the surface. That's how I want my threads to be ready for sewing. And I close the bobbin department because I don't need it anymore, and this way it's gonna be easier to sew. So before we start sewing, we have to decide what type of stitch we're gonna make. So you can see that on the left we have drawings of different stitches, and then on the right we have different needle positions. So either the needle is on the right, in the middle, or on the left. And when I move, like for example example here on the 5, the needle moves because it's completely on the left, and then when I put it to the 7, it moves back to the middle. Also, as you can see in the drawings, the 5 has very small stitches, very short distances between the stitches, and the 8 has longer stitches. So I am careful, or I have that in my mind when I am choosing the right length. So now that we chose our stitch, I went with a middle length straight normal stitch that has the needle in the middle, and I cut this sample fabric material that I have for just testing out different stitches. So what I do is I put the fabric under the press foot, and I put the press foot down so that the fabric doesn't move anymore. Then with a balance wheel, I put the needle into the fabric for the first contact. And then what I will do at the start is a back stitch. So I sew a stitch to the front, and then I will press the reverse lever, and it's gonna go back. And that is gonna secure the start of the stitch. And once that is done, you can see that if I press the foot pedal gently, it's gonna go slower. And if I press the foot pedal stronger, it's gonna go faster. And at the end, again, I do the back stitch to make sure that I secure the stitch. And there you go. You can check it, the front and the back, and see if the threads are okay, if the stitch is okay, and then we can make another one. Now we're gonna move to the zigzag stitch. So I rotate the stitch selector, and again I put the press foot down so that the fabric is not moving anymore. Then I put the needle down and I start sewing. See how the needle goes from left to right, and you just make a straight stitch down the fabric. Now something important is that we don't touch the stitch selection when the needle is down. We always put the needle up when we are doing those changes. And there you go, a beautiful zigzag stitch. And those two are the most basic one that you will probably use at the start. Now, as promised, here is a freebie that I prepared for you guys. Just a little gift for you that will hopefully make it easier for you to start sewing. At the start, I wrote 20 tips for my beginner sewists, everything from choosing the right fabrics, choosing the right needles, spinning, organization, different stitches, and I think it's a really nice rounded collection of little tips. And then in the second part of the freebie, we have these little stitch sheets, and I will explain you what they are. So you can see that they have different shapes or different patterns on them, and they're like little exercises for when you are getting familiar with the sewing machine. So I prepared these little sheets for you to practice. So what you will do is you're gonna grab the sewing machine and you're gonna take out the string. So the machine doesn't have a string on the top, or it doesn't have a string at the bottom. It's just the needle. So what you do is you put the paper under the press foot, you put the press foot down, you put the needle into the start of the line, and you just slowly press the pedal and sew through the paper. And then you try to be as precise as possible sewing on the line. And at the end, you can check where the little holes are, and you can see how precise you were. And you can start with the first one that is just straight stitches. Then we can move to the squarey one, and I will show you how you do that. So you need to know in which direction you're sewing. So you're always sewing from the top to bottom. So you put the needle here at the top, you sew the first straight stitch, and then you have the needle inside of the paper, and you put up the press foot, you rotate the paper for 90 degrees, you put the press foot back down with the needle still staying in, and then you continue sewing. And that is the same pattern that you're gonna be making while you're sewing on the fabric. So it's a very, very useful exercise for you to just get used to the machine, used to maneuvering the paper in this case, but then later the material. And then once you get better with just sewing through the paper, you can make it a bit harder for yourself, and you can draw a specific shape or a specific pattern on the test fabric, like I am doing it here, and then you just repeat the same exercise on the fabric. But this time, of course, you thread the machine so that you're actually gonna leave a stitch path at the end. So I hope you like these exercises, I hope you like the tips, and if you want to get your own freebie, you can find the link in the description. Okay, now, so before we jump to the last part of the video, let's talk a little bit about fabrics. Understanding different fabric types is crucial for any sewing project, so it's really important that you understand the differences and the qualities and an overall overall feel for it. So the first one that I think we should talk about is definitely cotton. Now, cotton is a plant-based fiber, and it's the best choice for beginners in my opinion. It's very cheap. It has a lot of different varieties. You can get it in different colors and different patterns, which is awesome. And it's very, very easy to work with. It's not gonna be slipping. It's not gonna be hard to maintain. So I would recommend to any beginner to start with cotton. Now the next one is linen. Now linen is also a plant-based fiber, and it's a bit harder to work with because it has a very specific quality, which is wrinkling. Linen wrinkles very, very easily and very, very fast. So sometimes it might be a bit harder to work with it, and also then with the later maintenance we have to be careful that we are always ironing it and making sure that we're not walking around with all wrinkly clothes. Unless you don't care, then I guess that is just fine. Something very good about linen is that it's very breathable and very light, even lighter and more breathable than cotton, so it's perfect for any summer clothing. Now the next one is polyester. Polyester is a chemical fiber, and the good thing about polyester is that it's very durable, it doesn't wrinkle, and the maintenance is pretty easy. And because of this qualities, it also doesn't shrink. So because of these qualities, it's also like mixed into other types of fabrics like linen, like cotton. So you usually find it in a mixture in the fabric. There is nothing wrong when using a little bit of polyester. I know a lot of people are afraid using non-natural fibers, but honestly there is nothing wrong with it, and it has some really good qualities that otherwise the natural fibers don't. Then we have the knit fabrics. Knit fabrics they're very stretchy and comfortable, and they're perfect for making any pieces of clothing. Now in textile and fashion world, we separate fabrics into two big groups, woven and knitted. Now woven ones are usually not as stretchy as the knitted ones, but on the other hand, knitted fabrics are very stretchy and they're very comfortable. Like for example, this bodysuit is made out of woven material. Now there is a trick, because you can also have a cotton woven material, and that is usually the material that all the t-shirts are made out of from, where it's still very stretchy but it's made out of cotton. So we have to be careful about those groups and making it clear in our mind, but the difference is how they are made, how they are produced, the way that the threads are being either knitted or woven together. I will put a pictures for a better understanding. And because of how these fabrics are made, they have different qualities, if that makes sense. But like I was saying, the knitted fabrics are way more stretchy, or they're very comfortable, but they can be tricky to use for beginners, because for stretchy fabrics you would usually need a machine for overlocking because the seams need to be stretchy. So I wouldn't recommend anything knitted for the beginners because it's gonna be very stretchy, but like please use the woven materials that are not stretchy, and that is gonna help you with the sewing. And of course, if you have a normal machine, then also that is for that material. The next material would be silk. Now silk, as we know it, is a very fancy material because it's made out of animals. They are made out of these little cocoons. I don't know if you know the story. Maybe one day I'm gonna talk about different fabrics and I can tell you the story about how, or at least the myth of how the silk was invented. But also there are different types of silks, which means that some silks are more shiny and reflective, the other ones are more matte, so that really depends. But just silk in general, it's a very high quality, expensive material. It can be very slippery and very hard to work with, so I wouldn't recommend it. Also, it's usually very pricey, so for a beginner that can make a lot of mistakes, I really wouldn't recommend this material. Another one that comes from the animals is of course wool, but we have also different types of wools. Like we have sheep wool, we have llama wool, we have alpaca wool, we have all different types of wools, okay? Now wool is usually warm and it's great for the outdoor outfits or clothing. Also, wool is something that I wouldn't recommend for a beginner because it can be very tricky to work with. And the last one that we can mention today is the fleece. Fleece is soft and warm, and it's perfect for if you're making like a blanket or a nice top, like for a cozy weather. It's very easy to work with. So of course, fleece is also one of the very good options for beginners in case you want want to make like a really nice cozy pullover or something like that. So now that we got an overall idea of different fabrics, different qualities of the fabrics, what do I recommend to use, I can just give you a few tips and tricks. The first one, very important one that a lot of people are not talking about, is the pre-wash. Now it's really important to pre-wash any type of fabric that you're gonna use for the projects. Why? Well, because it can experience some shrinkage, which means that if you're not washing the material before you're sewing it and you sew it all together and then it fits and suddenly you put it in a washing machine and afterwards it doesn't fit, well, it's because it shrunk, and that is something very common. So I really recommend you to pre-wash it before sewing the material. Now the second thing why I would recommend to pre-wash the material is for the discoloration or for bleeding. What that means is that the fabric itself is gonna bleed out or let some color out of the fibers, and that can really, you know, leave unpleasant traces. And I don't know if you have, for example here, let's say we have this material, it's the white base and it has black dots. Now if I don't pre-wash it, what I'm risking is that these black dots will start bleeding out and it's gonna be a bit of a like muddy material. And another thing is that it can stop being white but it turns into this grayish color because the blacks are gonna mix with the white. So that's why we need to pre-wash the fabrics. And the last thing would be that before you decide to sew the actual material for whatever project, just cut a little piece and try it on the sewing machine. This will help you with determining what type of stitch length is the best for the specific material, what is the best tension of the stitch. So all of these things you can discover while you're making that test stitch on the fabric that you're gonna be using. Trust me, it's gonna save you some troubles and money if you figure these things out beforehand. Okay, so now that we learned about all the supplies that we need and all the equipment, about machine anatomy and how to set up your machine, about different materials, I think we are ready for our first project, right? So when I was deciding and thinking what would be the best project for my sewing beginners, I decided to design this little back pouch for a phone, and I think it's a really cute design. It has very simple pattern pieces which makes it simple for you guys to sew and start your own project, and I think this will be a nice gentle intro for you girls to start sewing. Let's get right into it. Okay, so of course we start with a sketch. How else would we know what we are sewing? So I made this sketch just for the visualization, and then I continue sketching out all the pattern pieces that I will need for this little phone bag. Right there next to the pattern pieces, I also wrote how much of each piece will I need. Then I continue with the actual pattern making. So I measured my phone so that I knew what are the measurements going to be, and I wrote them down and started drawing. I added 2 centimeters on the length and on the width just so that I make sure that the phone is gonna fit in the bag. So if you're doing this by yourself, just make sure you have the right measurements. I drew the pattern also for the strap and for the little ruffles that are gonna go around the bag. Once I was happy with the pattern, I cut the pieces out and it was time to transfer everything to the material. Here are all the supplies that I needed, and I started with the lining. I chose a different material for the inside than the outside, so this is for the inside. I put the pattern piece for the lining on the material and I pin it down. Then I drew around it with a charcoal for fabric and I cut it out with the appropriate seam allowance. Then I moved to the next material that is gonna be the base for everything else, and again I pinned down the base pattern, marked it with the charcoal, and again cut it out with the seam allowance. You can see that this one was actually in 2 layers. Then I repeated the same process but only with 1 layer for the ruffles and for the strap. This is the ruffles, so again the same process, pinning, marking and cutting, and there you go. After I had all the pattern pieces cut out, I removed the paper pattern from the fabric and I pinned them into the right position. This was the ruffle, so I needed to pin it in half. Then this was the base and I just removed the paper pattern, and this was for the lining. I removed the paper pattern, separated them, and then I pinned them together face to face so that they are ready for sewing. You can see here how the lines in the back and in the front are aligned with the pins, and I repeated the same process for the strap. When I was done pinning all the parts, it was time for sewing. So first I sewed the sides for the ruffles, then I sewed the longest stitch for the strap. I made sure that I was sewing as straight as possible down the line that I marked before, and I made a stitch on the lining. Here I am being careful that when I am turning the fabric for 90 degrees, I make just a little stitch and I don't go through the whole bottom part, because later that hole that I created, it's gonna come very useful. And I repeated the same thing on the other side. And of course, a very important part after sewing the parts together is protecting the seam allowance. And I do this with an overlock machine, but you can also do it with a zigzag stitch that we learned before. This makes sure that the fabric or the material doesn't fall apart. So now that all the parts are overlocked, it was the time to turn around the strap. We're turning it around because of course the stitch is gonna be on the inside. So here I am helping myself with a screwdriver, which is not a very fabric friendly thing to do, and I definitely wouldn't recommend it, but I didn't have anything else appropriate close to me. After that it came the ironing, and ironing is a very important part of every sewing project. People are usually not aware of how important it actually is. It just puts everything in place and it helps you with the sewing stages. So I made sure that I ironed everything. And then it was the time to create a ruffle. So I did that with the hand stitching it and then kind of pulling it and organizing it in the way that I wanted. And after I was happy with how it looked, it was the time to attach it to the base or to the outside of the bag. First, I pinned down the start and the end, and then I kinda spread it around equally. And after it was pinned, I also made sure to hand stitch it again just for that extra security that is gonna help me once I decide to sew it with a machine. Once the stitch with the sewing machine was done and the ruffle was attached, I put on top the other side of the base, pinned them together face to face, and I made the stitch with the sewing machine on the inside edge so that it hit the stitch that I made for attaching the ruffle before. And once all 3 layers were sewn together, I was able to overlock it. And then I also overlocked the strap just for that extra protection. Now the last part was putting everything together, so the base, the straps, and the lining. And this is a bit of a tricky phase, so I attached the straps like this. And then I took the lining, and you can see that the face side of the lining was on the inside and the back side was on the outside, and I kinda stuffed the base into this little pocket. And I attached it and sew it with the sewing machine. That is gonna be the stitch that is gonna hold absolutely everything together. And there you go, this is the exciting time, this is the reveal. We unfold everything and you can see that there is the bag with the lining, and you put the lining on the inside of the bag, and there you go. And the phone fits and it looks so cute, and it was really easy to make. Great, so I know that this process has been very fast and very short, and I missed out a lot of the details that are very important for the process. So I decided to make a little mini course for you guys for this little bag. And I decided to include the course into the freebie that we already talked about in the video. So you can find the whole beginner's bundle down there in the link in the description. Now I think that is it. Congratulations, you've come to the end of the video. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you got a lot of useful information. I hope you feel ready to start your first project. Don't forget about that freebie that I mentioned in the video. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, you can leave me a comment, you can ask me a question, and if you're gonna sew something really cool, please tag me and I would love to see what you create. Okay, so see you in the next video and bye!